Into the Universe of Technical Images by Vilem Flusser. This chapter is called To Scatter. Technical images are at the center of society, but because they are so penetrating, people don't crowd around them, rather they draw back, each into his corner. A technical image radiates, and at the tip of each ray sits a receiver on his own. In this way, technical images disperse society into corners. Each technical image, except the film as discussed, is received as the endpoint of a ray, as a terminal. So the scattered society forms no amorphous heaps. Rather, the corners are distributed according to a structure that radiates outwards from the center. These rays, channels, media, structure the society as a magnet structures iron filings. The society, spread apart by the magnetic fascination of technical images, is indeed structured, and an analysis of the media can bring this structure to light. Media forms bundles that radiate from the centers, the senders. Bundles, in Latin, is facies. The structure of a society governed by technical images is therefore fascist. Not for any ideological reason, but for technical reasons. As technical images presently function, they lead on their own to a fascistic society. This social structure began to appear only a few decades ago, breaking through the previous social structures like a submarine through ice. As it breaks through, social groups that bound human interaction fall apart. Families, nationalities, classes disintegrate. Sociologists and cultural critics are characteristically more interested in the fall of earlier social structure than they are in the rise of the new. They pay more attention to the cracking ice than the rising boat. This is the reason they speak of a decaying society rather than a new society. They criticize the falling structures rather than criticizing the new ones. With the family, they speak of phallocratic machismo, with nationality of chauvinism, with class of the struggle between classes. They are kicking dead horses. The explanation for this critical blind spot is easy to find. Disintegrating social forms are more interesting than new ones, because they are sanctified by familiarity. The family, for instance, is a serious matter, and a high value is placed on the human relationships that constitute it. For example, the love between man and woman, or between parents and children. When families fall apart, the underlying values are lost. Therefore, a constructive critique of the decaying family, for example, the suggestion of alternative family models such as kibutzes or cooperatives, appears to be justifiable. But in fact, every attempt to rescue the family from the intrusion of television or the computer is a hopeless, reactionary project. It is one of the ice shards that drift and dissolve. In comparison to the family, new social forms such as newspaper subscribers are not interesting. They are not sanctified. There is no higher value ascribed to the relationship between the newspaper, its sender, and its receivers. Those who criticize these new social forms appear to be sidetracked, but in fact it is exactly these new forms that demand our concentrated attention. For not only are they displacing the old, sanctified forms, they are also consecrating new relationships and new values. If the point of cultural criticism is to maintain and increase human freedom and dignity, then its focus must be on just these new forms. But only if we can recognize the rising fascistic patterns in time to change them, may we hope that a humane society could emerge from technical images' revolt against our inherited social structure. The present cultural revolution is technical, not ideological. Therefore, inherited political categories such as liberal, socialist, conservative, and progressive no longer apply. That may confound critics, but really effective revolutions have always been technical. Let us take as an example the most powerful revolution known to us, that of the Neolithic. It grew out of new technologies of farming and animal husbandry. These technologies overturned the earlier Mesolithic structures and led to new family groups, to the village, to war, to private ownership, to slavery. These new social forms were sanctified after the fact and endowed with value. Not the founders of the Neolithic religions, but the inventors of cows and flour were the revolutionaries, and had a contemporary critic tried to evaluate the situation from the standpoint of outmoded ideologies. For example, had he tried to evaluate the hunter's value, he would have missed the point. The first industrial revolution may be another case in point. It too was technical. Its revolutionaries were the inventors of machines, the social forms they produced. For example, the proletariat were consecrated only in retrospect by religious figures such as Marx and Lenin. Today's revolutionaries are not Gaddafis or Meinhofs, but rather the inventors of technical images. Niepce, Lumiere, the numberless and nameless inventors of computer technology. These are the ones who have brought the new social forms about. And so if we want to instigate a humane society, we must understand the new technologies, not higher values. For example, we must ask whether it is technically possible to modify the fascistic structure of radiating images. Such technical questions are the politically interesting ones today. We can leave the retroactive consecration and valorization for a later time and someone who founds religions. Those who think politically according to older categories perhaps think that technology is politically neutral and missing the cultural revolution. The destruction of traditional social groups through technical images. For example, the family through television or nationality through satellites looks like decadence from the standpoint of the past. Society drifts into corners, into the lonely mass, and interpersonal bonds, the social tissue dissolve. The young Californians who sit in isolation at their computer terminals with their backs to one another have no social awareness. They belong to no family and identify with neither nationality nor class. From a non-ideological, that is, phenomenological perspective, it is possible to recognize the appearance of the new social connective tissue. It is possible to recognize the threads that bind these new people to the senders of technical images. It becomes clear that we are dealing not with an asocial person, but one who is profoundly socialized, although in a new sense. In fact, we are dealing with people who are so completely socialized that we justifiably fear for their individuality, despite their apparent isolation. The scattering into isolation appears here as the flip side of the coin, like Shelton political alignment. According to the current circuitry of the technical images, this fear is justified, but there are signs that this pattern could change, for the new social structure is dynamic. The threads that run from image to isolated person and back to image. This traffic between image and person, this feedback that threatens to become entropic, forms the isolating, homogenizing core of society. But there are threads that start to run in another direction, namely from one person to another, straight across the bundles of rays that bind images to people, dialogic threads that cross the horizontal, discursive media bundles. Dialogic threads such as cable, video phones, or conferencing video could open the fascist tissue of the rising society to the kind of web we are in the habit of calling democratic. And if such a web was actually constructed and images installed according to such a pattern, one could no longer speak of isolation and political coordination. For then people of the future would truly be in dialogue, in a global conversation. Decay. Whether and how dialogic threads can be drawn is a technical question, but the truly revolutionary engagement would be to turn this technical question into a political one, and that means to turn the scattering of the population to the service of human freedom and dignity by rebuilding the circuitry of the images, directing the force of the rising society towards the advancement of these values. Such an engagement assumes, of course, that the rebuilding of the circuitry itself can be undertaken dialogically, for when the dialogic threads from senders, such as governments or commercial institutions, are introduced to present, they must remain in the service of the sender, despite their dialogical function. In this way, the net preserves its fascistic bundled structure. To turn a technical question into a political one, it must be torn from the technician's hands. Technology has become too serious a matter to be left to technicians. In other words, the revolutionary reconstruction of the current circuitry of technical images into a dialogical democratic one presumes that a general consensus must exist in this respect. The people must want it. There is no prospect for such a consensus, however. On the contrary, at present there is a consensus between the images and their bundled streams on one hand, and the receivers on the other. The people want to be scattered by the images so that they don't have to collect and assemble themselves as they would if they were in fact a dialogue. They are happy not to have to do it anymore. For at one time, when society was ordered by interpersonal relationships, there was an out-group and an in-group. There was a public space outside, for example, outside the family, and a private space inside, and one spread himself out in public to assemble himself in private. Hegel called this the unhappy consciousness. If I go out into the world, I lose myself in it, and if I go into myself to collect myself, then I am lost to the world. This unhappy consciousness is happily no longer required. For in the dispersed society there is neither inside nor outside. The unhappy consciousness rests. There you can spread out as you wish, and every dialogue is dangerous because it could awaken the unhappy consciousness from its sleep. The consensus between image and person rests on the disinclination of the people to collect themselves as much as on the intention of the images to disperse people. But unhappy consciousness is the only form of consciousness there is, for happiness is not conscious. People want to disperse themselves, to lose consciousness, to become happy. The present dispersal of society has resulted from a general wish to be happy. We are on the way to a happy society. Shangri-La is just around the corner. Everyone is at once a mouth that sucks on the images and an anus that gives the undigested, sucked thing back to the images. Psychoanalysis describes his happiness as the oral anal phase. Cultural analysis calls his happiness mass culture. It is happiness at the level of the nursery, intellectually as well as morally and aesthetically. The present dispersal of society can be seen as a move towards this happy twilight condition. Today's revolutionaries, those who want to spin threads through the narcotizing discourse, decline to take part in this general consensus about happiness. They are muckrakers. They want to awaken this fading consciousness because they believe that the mindless happiness sponsored by the images is demeaning. That is, present-day revolutionaries are walking towards something that only they want. They take action exactly against the general consensus between images and people, and they know that they can achieve nothing as long as the others don't go along. They know that it isn't technically difficult to draw dialogic threads such as cables, video telephones, or video sockets, but that such sockets are merely gadgets and will remain nonsensical as long as there is no political will to use them to rebuild society, as, for example, the current pornographic babble with Minitel and Strasbourg. Present-day revolutionaries know that they first have to build a consensus. Their action is not against images, but against the current feedback consensus between images and people. This action is utterly unspectacular, for if it was spectacular, visible in images, it would be self-defeating. It would then simply assist in dispersing people. The people that are shouting and sounding alarms today, the Che Guevaras and the Khomeinis, and those who count as revolutionaries are really entertainers. They are spectacular, and the spectacle they present assists in the images in dispersing us more and more efficiently. The true revolutionaries, on the other hand, do not appear in the images, but that does not necessarily mean that they are inaccessible to the scattered society. It is true that they can't be seen in the images, but we can see them by looking through the images. For although the revolutionaries don't show themselves in the images, they appear in the manner in which the image shows themselves. Revolutionaries can manipulate the images so that people begin to glimpse the possibility of using these images to initiate previously unimaginable interpersonal relationships, and that the images could be used for dialogue, the exchange of information, and the fabrication of new information. Because the scattering images are beginning to bore people, and a dialogical game through images with other people could be suspenseful and exciting, one can just about imagine that the revolutionaries could succeed in breaking the feedback loop between image and person and creating a new dialogical consensus. Contemporary revolutionaries are not actively opposed to the images themselves, but rather to the integrated circuitry. They actively promote dialogical rewired images. Contemporary revolutionaries are envisioners, photographers, filmmakers, video makers, computer programmers, grounded in the revolution and technical images. Their visionary powers are focused on a society in which people exchange information through images and, in so doing, constantly produce new information in probable situations. Only as a result of this new capacity to visualize does it become possible to conceive of such a social formation. There are revolutionaries that want to change not only the underlying structure but the surface of the so-called information society. The social structure that is now appearing represents a synchronization of these radiating images with the dispersed, lonely, depersonalized people who sit at the terminals of these rays. Revolutionary visualization tries to replace this structure with another in a way that the images bring new interpersonal relationships into being and lead to new social configurations, the names of which